Talktainment Radio Worldwide Sound. Talktainmentradio.com. We give you a reason to come. The world's greatest radio. We give you a reason to stay. Radio, the way it should be heard. You got the power.
The views and opinions expressed are those of the host and guest and not necessarily those of TalkTainmentRadio.com, the management, the staff, or K&E World Network, LLC.
This is The Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller, heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com, the world's greatest radio. Radio, the way it should be heard. And now, Mr. Neely Fuller.
If you do not understand white supremacy, which is racism, what it is and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. Only confuse you. Only confuse you.
Well, good morning and welcome to TalkTainmentRadio.com, the world's greatest radio, and you are in touch with the compensatory concept. I am Mr. Bobby, and this is radio the way it should be heard. Good morning, everybody. 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here in Ohio, where the show is emanating from. Dr. Fuller is in Washington, D.C., and this is how we communicate. Speaking about communication, listen, if you would like to get in contact with the radio station here at Talktainment Radio, this is what you have to do. Contact E. Dozier at TalktainmentRadio.com. That's E. Dozier at TalktainmentRadio.com. He will answer any questions regarding Talktainment Radio or the website. Now, we're on the phone with Dr. Neely Fuller, the author of two outstanding works, The United Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and or action, and also The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a compensatory counter-racist codified word guide. You just have to have these in your library because Dr. Fuller has spent time to go through this information and research it and research it and research it, and it is just completely outstanding. And as you just heard, if you do not understand racism, what it is and how it works, you're just going to be in a state of confusion, and we already know who the author of confusion is. First of all, let me say good morning, Dr. Fuller, and how are you this morning?
I'm still learning.
Yes, sir. I love it. I'd love to hear you say that. Our phone lines are open, and if you would like to call, we have lines open now. You can call at 1-877-932-9766. And trust me, all calls are for Dr. Fuller. He is ready. And they're jumping off the hook already, Dr. Fuller. So let's get started. Before even Dr. Fuller speaks, we have a telephone call from Luke. Luke, calling from New York City. Go ahead, Luke. You're on with Dr. Fuller.
Good morning, Bobby. Good morning, Mr. Fuller.
Good morning.
Mr. Fuller, we've spoken before, and I just want to say thank you for all the work you're doing. Even though we're still under the system of white supremacy, you say it's either there or not there, but I just want to say thank you. I had two quick questions. My first question is, Mr. Fuller, is it possible for someone to operate under the system of white supremacy while still knowing? Because, as you know, most people are not aware. And, I mean, it's one of those things that once you notice, you can't unnotice. And so, but I'm still young. I went to school with white individuals. Some of them white supremacists, probably very likely. Some of them not. And it's difficult for me to orient myself, even in my family, because I see the poison in the vial constantly being spewed. And if I try to speak about anything, like you said, Mr. Fuller, people get bored of racism real fast. And I talk about what they want to talk about, and I try to keep my language as coded as possible, even among my white friends, even among my family. How does one operate under the system of white supremacy? I know you're going to just point out the code, but how do you because people don't want to talk about it at all. So how do you navigate and orient yourself? Because people are still worried about the still day-to-day interactions and don't see the forest; they just see the trees. So how does one go about having those everyday, day-to-day interactions without immediately jumping to racism and white supremacy? Because that's what
Go ahead, Dr. Fuller, answer his question there.
All problems are solved through the process of questions and answers. The record shows that. The record of everything that people have done in the universe. It always starts with a question. And then all questions have answers. Every question has an answer. And usually the answer is, the swift answer is, I don't know. And then that calls for another question. Why don't you know? Do you need to know? And then on and on and on. And so usually people have the most questions about problem solving because everyone on the planet has some type of problem, small or large. Might be a problem like, which bus do you catch this morning in order to get from point A to point B? And if you don't know, you have to ask someone. And when you ask someone, you get an answer. And then you might have another question. Well, you told me what bus to catch, but where do I catch it? That calls for another question and another answer. So all problems are solved through the process of questions and answers. So you don't start off trying to give people a problem. If people say that racism doesn't bother them or they don't want to talk about it, they're not interested in it. And I agree with you. Most people don't. It's a very tired subject. And usually people say, well, it doesn't have anything to do with me directly, and I got other problems that I have to deal with, so I don't have time to talk about that foolishness. And, or they say that, well, I mean, it's out there somewhere. I mean, this thing called racism, but don't bother me with it. And then people just outright say it has no connection with me. What are you talking to me about this for? I mean, when I have other things to think about. So the process is always, since you're talking about problems, because the only reason you talk about racism is that it's a problem. So if people are saying, any person is saying, individual persons say, well, it might be a problem for somebody else, and it might even be a problem for me somewhere down the road or every now and then. But I have other things that are priority. So you always go with what the person is talking about at the time. And most people will, somewhere in their conversations, talk about some type of problem that they have. So let them talk about what they're talking about. Because if racism is the dominant political and religious motivating force, which I claim that it is, among the people of the planet, any problem that anyone has, if that person is of color, you might say, a person classified as non-white, any problem that he or she has, that non-white person, is going to lead to the problem of racism anyway. Right. So let them do the leading. Let the person that you're talking to lead you, and you, through the process of questions and answers, they'll say, well, I have a problem getting a job. Oh, you have a problem getting a job. Why do you have a problem getting a job? That's the process.
Okay, Luke, what's your second question for Dr. Fuller?
Yeah, one more question, Mr. Fuller. Is someone, because you say a white supremacist is someone who believes in the mistreatment of people who has color in their skin, correct, Mr. Fuller?
Say that again.
Is it a white, this is my question, but I'm leading to it. A white supremacist is someone who believes in the mistreatment in someone else because of skin color, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so is someone a white supremacist if they don't want to mistreat people of color, but they do, in fact, because you've spoken about this before, if people want to continue, and this kind of goes with Dr. Cresswellson's theory, if people want to continue being white, there has to be some sort of conscious effort to make sure that happens. Is someone a white supremacist if they don't want to mistreat people of color, but they do, in fact, prefer some sort of separation?
Some sort of what?
Separation.
Well, then that means that white person who says that has to get rid of the system of white supremacy, because it's the white supremacists, those white people who believe in white supremacy, which means dominating and mistreating people based on color, who make the decisions about what's going to happen between white and non-white. So that white person who wants to make some type of change in this arrangement is going to have to talk to the white people who are practicing this dominant system. By them talking to a black person about it, that's not helping at all, because the black person is helpless in this situation. That's a total waste of time for a white person to sit down and talk to a black person about something that other white people who believe in white supremacists are doing. Because the other white people who believe in white supremacy are the power source. They make the decisions about what the interaction is going to be between white and non-white. And any white person who wants to go against that, if they're really serious about it, they're going to find that out, because it means they're going to run into the white people who believe in white supremacy, and they'll say, well, what are you doing to our enterprise? You are supposed to be a part of this collective enterprise because you are white. So what's this nonsense that you're doing trying to change this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So that's strictly between them. It has nothing to do with you.
All righty.
Okay.
Thank you, Luke, from New York City. Thank you so much for calling.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank
Okay.
you, Mr. Fuller. I appreciate it.
All righty. Dr. Fuller, as we proceed on here, during the past week, since we last spoke, has there been any outstanding things that have happened that you'd like to bring attention to at this time for our listeners?
Oh, well, all of the news that's going on every day. Here again, the so-called Middle East is boiling over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you react to that if you are a person of color? I always say what I've been saying ever since I started first thinking about the so-called Middle East, when I was hearing about it, mostly as a teenager and paying attention to it in the 1940s and 50s. And I saw how that evolved, and I asked questions about it. I wasn't getting any answers that were satisfying to me. So I came to my own conclusions, which may or may not be in error. And I always like to say that to the audience about anything that I say. It may or may not be in error, but it's just my opinion based on what I think and the conclusions I've come to. So the whole Middle East situation is going to continue. Now, what I mean by that situation, it's designed to be a cauldron of confusion, and I say by the white supremacists. They came up with this idea of something called the Middle East. That changes every now and then, by the way.
Well, Dr.
Sometimes
Fuller, some of our listeners, including me, but I've done some research on this, were not born when the Middle East was put together. But based on some of the things that you have mentioned, I went back and I studied it, and I wanted to see what the world looked like before the so-called Middle East was formed, because all of my life it's always been here, but you were here before it was formed. So what was it like? And then I know why that they did that, but for our listeners who do not know that, why was the so-called Middle East formed?
Oh, well, I've forgotten that myself. I mean, I just felt that, or rather, I'm thinking about something called the Middle East, and I'm thinking within the context of white supremacy, because I always start with that premise.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
What does that actually mean in function? And so when I look at the pictures of the people who are running here and running there, and shells bursting in the air, and airplanes flying over, and people, with mortars and rifles, and you see the ladies and females with the babies in their arms fleeing. And first thing I always look at in any situation is, are the people of color? And if the people who are doing this, who are fleeing this devastation, which is usually the case, are people who have color in their skin, I automatically say, oh, this is nothing but another white supremacist scheme.
Right.
You automatically go to that, and I recommend that everybody on the planet does that. It's always the white supremacists. I don't care what it looks like on the surface. I don't care what the issues are supposed to be on the surface. It's always the white supremacists. Why? Where's the logic? Because they run all of the affairs of all of the non-white people on this planet.
On this planet.
In every area of activity. You immediately come to that conclusion, and then when you start looking for the filling that goes in that pie to prove the conclusion that you have come to, I don't care how much research you'll do, it'll always come up why is it the non-white people are going through this misery?
Yes, this is true.
That's the question.
You're listening to the compensatory concept with Dr. Neely Fuller here exclusively on TalkTamitRadio.com. You can also call the station at 1-877-932-9766. And Dr. Fuller is here. He's ready to answer your questions. And right now we were speaking about the Middle East, and particularly, well, Dr. Fuller said he forgot, but I know that England had a lot to do with that in the formation and from that in the so-called Middle East and displacing people. But you should check that out and find out for yourself why they did that. Dr. Fuller, we had another choking incident in New York City. I was trying to get to Luke about that, but we didn't have time to really entertain that. But this time, a 27-year-old pregnant black woman was choked in New York City, and I really couldn't come up with a reason why. All she was doing, according to the articles that I read, she was barbecuing. She was barbecuing out there, and as far as I know, there's not a law against barbecuing in New York City. I've seen it before in my travels to New York City in the wintertime where people were actually barbecuing. So I don't know what's going on, and Mayor de Blasio said he's going to look into that. But under the system of racism, white supremacy, the codification, what does that say? What does that speak to?
Well, I speak to how you react to it. Was it law enforcement officers that did the choking, or what?
Yes. The New York City Police Department again. Now, this is a week after they had choked Eric Garner and killed him. They blamed it on his weight, but they being the authorities in charge, they blamed that on his weight, but they're still investigating the circumstances concerning that. But it was taken out of a script right out of the movie of Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, where they choked Radio Raheem, and then they turn around again and they do this to a 27-year-old pregnant woman. I know her last name is Miller. I just couldn't understand it. Can you shed some light on that subject?
I don't know about the specific incident, but I have said repeatedly, and I said it about the choking incident that was brought up on this program a week or so ago, I believe.
Yes, sir.
Yes. The procedure should be the same for the non-white people throughout this planet, and that is when you're approached by a person who may be, not necessarily that the person is, but the person may be a law enforcement officer who is actually a white supremacist. Now, that's a different category. And I have said that on most so-called police forces where there are non-white people interacting with white people in those type of settings, and you have a law enforcement officer who is called a police officer, but they're not really police officers if they are racist. But you must assume that on every significant police force where there are non-white people and white people involved, that some of the people, maybe just one or two, maybe 1 or 200, you don't know, some of the people are posing as police officers, and they are really white supremacists, because you can't be a white supremacist and a police officer at the same time. And we should get in the habit of saying that. That's a race soldier. That's an imposter. That's a person that has nothing to do with policing. That's a person who is a white supremacist. You cannot be a white supremacist and a police officer. The two terms don't go together. A white supremacist is a white supremacist. And if you want to give it to a title, give him or her a title, it would be race soldier. That's what I have in the word guide. That's a race soldier. That's not a police. That's not a police officer.
Hiding behind law enforcement. Or
yes.
Okay.
The person is an imposter.
Okay.
It's like me going into a precinct station and putting on a uniform, and I am an enemy agent of some type. I mean, but I have a different mission from everybody else on that law enforcement body. So I just go in there and put on a uniform and a gun and put on a badge and go out and get in one of the cars and start driving down the street and then I have my own agenda. That's my own agenda. That's not the agenda of the so-called police force.
So because they put on that badge,
that individual
or uniform, or do you feel that empowers them to be able to attack any non-white person?
Yes, and so you should expect that. You should expect it.
Okay.
I'll give you an example.
Okay.
If 5 law enforcement officers show up in a setting where there are white and non-white people involved, and 5 law enforcement officers show up, and you see that 5 of them, or 3 of them, or 2 of them, or just maybe 1 of them is classified as white.
Yes, sir.
That could be a racist suspect right there. That could be one of those imposters. You don't know. You have no way of knowing. So what do you do in that type of setting? First thing you do is consider yourself a captive right away. Don't argue with that person. Don't make any moves whatsoever that may be used as a probable cause on the part of that person to kill you, because that's what that person intends to do. You have to assume that. Here they come. One of them may be a race soldier. So I'm going to act accordingly, because this is war. And in a few minutes, I'm going to be dead. You have to assume that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're black, you must assume that under every circumstance, without exception. You've got to. Otherwise, now, people might say, oh, that's inflammatory. I mean, to even start people to thinking like that. No. It happens too often. And it's been going on year after year after year after year. So this is a pattern. This is not some type of weird thing that happens, and everybody's bewildered by it. No, it's predictable. And we ought to learn from things that are predictable.
And do what?
I said a few when the incident came up prior to this.
Yes.
I said, even as we are speaking about it, it's happening somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I remember saying that, because I usually say that, because it's happening somewhere right now as we speak about it.
So you say learn about it. You say learn about it.
I'd like to say this. It doesn't make any difference how many demonstrations you have in the street. It doesn't make any difference how many teddy bears you hang on fences. That's getting to be almost like, well, I won't criticize it as such, but I'm saying it's not going to help.
Okay.
I don't care how many candles you burn and RIPs on the graffiti wall. It's going to be happening even as you're putting that on the wall. It goes with the territory of white supremacy. You're in a system of white supremacy. So you should expect this over and over and over again. And how do you react to it as an individual? Say, I'm now a captive.
Okay.
I'm a captive of an alien force.
Okay, here's an email. Mr. Bobby asked Mr. Fuller, what do we do then? Didn't leave a name.
Yes, what you do is do the same thing you would do if you are an enemy soldier. You're considered to be an enemy soldier, and you're behind enemy lines. You're a paratrooper. I've given this illustration over and over again. You have dropped behind enemy lines. And now, while you're trying to wrestle your way out of your parachute, you find yourself surrounded completely by soldiers with bayonets fixed, whose orders are, if he or she makes any move whatsoever to disobey you, kill him or her instantly. Now, don't hesitate. You have to have that in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
This is not when these various altercations come, I see it on these the cop programs and all like that. I see black males sometimes, and it's almost scary.
Yes, sir.
Because they don't know. Arguing and sometimes putting up a fight and trying to break loose and all that type of nonsense.
Yes, sir.
Which is pure nonsense. Don't you know what you're doing? You're asking for death. You're showing out talking about you being king of the hood and all like that. It's not going to help. You're just going to be another statistic lined up in a casket with your grandmother throwing herself over the casket, crying about my grandchild over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. We should have learned something by now.
All righty. Dr. Fuller, we have another call. This is a call from North Carolina. Tippy, what is your question only for Dr. Fuller?
Well, I really don't have a question. I have a comment.
Okay.
If you will.
Go ahead.
And I'm going to keep it short because this is a subject we could talk about all day long.
Yes, sir.
I think that African Americans, especially African American men, the quick fix is to do what Dr. Fuller was talking about. Okay, but the intricate fix that they can go on is that we have to teach our sons and our daughters as well. That if they ever encounter a police officer, just cooperate. Because, why would you, act all up? They got the gun, they got the spray, they got the batarangs, they got everything. So just cooperate. That's what I teach my son.
Okay, you're a teacher?
Yes, I am a teacher.
Okay, all righty. Dr. Fuller, how would you respond to that?
That's what I've been saying over and over again, and other people have said it. There have been books written about it. What do you do? But most black people keep ignoring it. They keep thinking that this is some kind of misunderstanding among friends. This is a volatile situation. This is a military situation. You're in a war. Get that through your heads, folks. Worldwide, somebody in a uniform, a gun, and a badge, it may be an imposter, not a person who is coming to serve and protect. That may be a person. If that person has white skin, unfortunately, in a white supremacist system, that person may be, not always, maybe most of the time, not most of the time, but there is a great likelihood that in these type of situations, that one or two of those individuals may be a race soldier, in which case you are facing instant death and nothing is going to be done about it, except you're going to be dead, and a lot of black people are going to be out there with signs the next day.
Go ahead,
which
Tippy,
is not
what's your
going to
question?
change anything.
Okay. Go ahead, Tippy.
What I was going to add to Dr. Fuller's remark is that, it's the other piece of the puzzle is that, the brothers, we got to step up, and we got to take back, our kingmanship in our homes and take care of our kids. And single mothers, they do the best they can. But they need a role model in that home other than, the rap thing, the gangster rap stuff, they glamorize all of that and think that it's okay. No, it's not okay, because all you're doing is putting another nail in their coffin.
45 seconds. Dr. Fuller, you want to respond to that before we go to break?
The role model for black people worldwide is a counter-racist code that's tailored for the individual to take care of situations, just what we're talking about now. What do you do when you are facing a suspected race soldier? You comply. If the race soldier calls you every kind of name in the book, you say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. That's how you talk.
Wow.
What do you want me to do? Go into the question mode.
Hang on.
Don't say anything aggressive.
Hang on.
Why? Because you're going to lose. That's why.
All right. Hang on, Dr. Fuller. Talk to him at radio.com. Check us out on WCRS FM 98.3. Wednesdays and Sunday evening. Blogs and podcasts are available. Download Talk to him at radio.com app to your cell or tablet. We go where you go. Radio, the way it should be heard. Coming up next, we have more calls, and we're going to talk about the inside job. All this and more coming up next on Talk to him at radio.com. Thank you, Tippy.
TalkTainmentRadio.com is the premier internet radio platform offering 40-plus talk radio-style programs professionally produced, optimized for online distribution, featuring Columbus, Ohio on-air personalities. TalkTimitRadio.com offers listeners diverse programming options covering topics such as arts and culture, love, life and relationships, technology, religion, paranormal activities, local and national politics, women's issues, alongside health and wellness. Listeners can access their favorite TalkTimitRadio.com programs free of cost through the website. Download the TTR app to your cell phone and you can take us wherever you go. We have programs on demand to fit your schedule through our podcast. The address is TalkTainmentRadio.com.
Franklin County Children's Services and the City of Columbus invite you to Mayor Michael Coleman's Neighborhood Block Party and Fam Jam, a family enrichment festival on Saturday, August 2nd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Columbus Commons Park in downtown Columbus. The event is free and open to the public. Take the bus, ride your bike, carpool, walk, or ride to one of the area parking garages and spend the day with them. Fam Jam will bring families together for tons of fun while learning about helpful community programs and safety tips. Head out and see your favorite neighborhood pride partners, climb on a real fire engine, and go through the Columbus Fire Department Safe House. There will also be food, games, entertainment, and bounce houses, plus parenting tips, safety information, and community information from more than 70 exhibitors. Please join Franklin County Children's Services and the City of Columbus at this family-focused event and help them protect children by strengthening families. For more information, call Children's Services Community Outreach Department at 614-341-6085.
Have you ever wished you could spend more time with your kids, or maybe quality time with your spouse, when you can actually have an uninterrupted conversation? Do you owe your dad a little catch-up time? Well, it's time to reconnect, and no activity can bond a family together quite like boating and fishing. I mean, think of all the great experiences you had as a kid when you went boating or fishing. Well, guess what? It's still great. Boating and fishing are the perfect opportunities for your family to get away, to talk, to laugh, to create new memories. So take someone you love out on the water and see where the water takes you. If you haven't been on the water in a while and you're not sure where to start, or if you just like to have some helpful tips for your next trip, please visit TakeMeFishing.org. This has been a public service of TalkTainmentRadio.com. Radio, the way it should be heard.
The United Independent Compensatory Code System concept by Neely Fuller is considered as one of the substantial and basic books for understanding and effectively countering racism. Neely Fuller will turn upside down everything you've heard and everything you think you know about racism and how it works. Call area code 202-484-5461. 202-484-5461.
For information on everything from passports to driver's licenses to local weather, go to firstgov.gov. Firstgov.gov, the official source for federal, state, and local government information.
Years ago, identical twins were separated at birth. Chris Paul was destined for life of basketball. Cliff Paul was destined to become a State Farm agent. They shared one invaluable trait. They were both born to assist. Find an agent born to get you to a better state.
Hi, this is Bobby West, the new host of the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller, every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here on TalkDamonRadio.com. And yes, I am back. So tune in every Wednesday for the Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller with your new co-host, Bobby West, right here on TalkTamonRadio.com. Radio, the way it should be heard.
You got the power.
All righty, welcome back to TalkTamonRadio.com, the world's greatest radio, and that's radio the way it should be heard. This is Mr. Bobby. And you are listening to the Compensatory Concept with Dr. Neely Fuller. And there's been some questions why I call him Dr. Neely Fuller, and some just call him Mr. Fuller. To me, Dr. Fuller is a doctor with the information that he disperses. And if you take heed to it and listen, and not only listen, but research it, do the research, then you'll begin to understand what he's talking about. And as he says in his openings, concerning racism, white supremacy. And it's true. If you don't know what it is and how it works, you're only going to be confused. You really have to do those two things to understand it and then how it works. And see, that's how a doctor does. You know, you go to a doctor, and you tell a doctor what's going on, and the doctor explains it to you, and then tells you how it works. And usually, they prescribe some prescription, and you take it to the pharmacist or whatever, and then you take care of your situation. Well, he's putting out this to me a prescription. So this is my thing. I call him Dr. Fuller. You don't have to do that. Okay, you don't have to do that. You can call him Mr. Fuller. You can call him Fuller. He doesn't care. You know, but what he does care about, his passion is to be able to answer your questions concerning what he has researched and what he has studied. As a matter of fact, on that line, he has written 2 outstanding books. One is the United Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook workbook for thought, speech, and or action, and the other is the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept, a compensatory counter-racist codified word guide. Dr. Fuller, if somebody wants to get this book or these books, and I highly recommend that they do, how can they get these books?
Go to producejustice.com. That's producejustice.com. Like a product, like you're trying to produce something, you're trying to produce, presumably, a product called justice. So you go to producejustice.com, PRODUCE, justice.com. And what will come up on the screen is a picture of the basic textbook for victims of white supremacy and an additional book called a counter-racist word guide, how to use words, how not to use words, what words to ask questions about when other people use them, when you're talking about any subject, and particularly the subject of racism, white supremacy.
Yes, sir. Okay. So I don't want to cut you off. Sometimes I may be a little anxious in trying to get something in because I may be up against the break. So hopefully don't take offense to that if I cut you or any of other callers off. Anyway, speaking of callers, 1-877-932-9766 is the number you can call to get in contact with Dr. Fuller. As a matter of fact, we have a call from California. Looks like it's going to be Estelle. Estelle, go ahead with your call for Dr. Fuller.
Hello, Dr. Fuller. I'm a paratrooper. I'm supposed to be surrounded. I just wanted to start with that because I get what you're saying about this being a war. I was hoping you could address the issue of racial dislocation. I spoke to someone who had traveled to South Africa, and they stated that basically nothing has changed for the black people in South Africa. That just because they put the head up there of Nelson Mandela, that basically the power still rests with the descendants of Boers and the British, and the colored class is the middleman and middle woman, and then the blacks, the large number of blacks, are still subject in a greater horrible way, and they live in shanty towns. So for us here, I talked with you a week or so ago about helping me with my offspring, and one thing you had told us about living very modestly. So basically, I'm to the point as a soldier where I have my bed, I can just fold it up and pick and go if I need to go. But could you address that for other people out there who keep thinking that, these rents that are shooting up sky high, and most of us have a hard time paying just to live? Could you address that and how that the white supremacists are using that strategy to harm black people?
Yes, that's one of the 6 basic strategies that the white supremacists are using now, and that is racial dislocation, confusion. The key word here is confusion, but the word dislocation also is very important because it means you are forced to move from one place to another. Dislocation is not the same as relocation. Relocation is when you voluntarily go from one place to another, whether it's one house to another, one apartment to another, or one town to another, one area to another. But you do it voluntarily. Dislocation is when you are being forced to. Now, the white supremacists have to be able to make black people non-white people move from one place to another. They're not going to give that up. That goes with the package, the entire package of the system of white supremacy itself. In the system of white supremacy, there are some absolutes. So always be prepared to be forced to move. I mean, if you're renting a place and whatnot, you can think that you're settled in and all like that, even with a fine job and all like that. All they have to do is just come around and go up on your rent. But you say, well, that's all the more reason I don't rent. I own my own place. Oh, you think you do, and you're non-white? Well, they can come along and say, we got something called eminent domain. And we are going to run some railroads through where your house is. Why? Because it's good for the body politic as a whole. And you say, well, why my house? Well, why not your house? And that's the kind of answer they give. So where the black people are, that's where they run the new rail lines. And the black people have to move. They say, well, that happens to some white people too. True. But white people have more alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
They have more compensation. The black people don't get this. And they are forced to move maybe several times, where the white person might not be forced to move but once. See, black people are always on the move. You look at the newsreels and all like that. It's always dark-skinned people who have their babies in their arms, straggling across the desert, or trying to get over some fence, or trying to cross somebody's border, you know, with someone chasing them with rifles, trying to corral them and send them back where they came from, whatnot. Well, where they came from was also orchestrated by the white supremacists. You're forced to move from where you are. Then when you get ready to go to another place, they're saying you can't come here, even though they control, the white supremacists control all places where non-white people are. You got to have that in mind. They're talking about people trying to get out of Haiti, people trying to get out of Nigeria and whatnot, and fleeing across the desert and whatnot, or people trying to get out of Honduras. Well, why are they trying to leave Honduras? They say, well, the gang warfare and people with guns and people just going around crazy, doing crazy things, burning down people's houses and shooting them in the street. And the little children, I mean, you know, not being able to play on the playground because somebody's going to kill them and all like that. Well, now, why is this happening? The white supremacists are behind it. Where the guns come from? Always the white supremacists. Nobody but them. Nobody but them. Always them. Never anybody else. It's always them. Where dark-skinned people, people of color, are concerned. So the people say, I can't stay here anymore. I can't stay in this neighborhood anymore. I'm in south side of Chicago. I can't stay here anymore. I got to get out. So that's one way of getting you out. Gunfire, that they just allow people, just bodies to stack up in the funeral homes every weekend. So you decide that you can't walk the streets, you can't get to work, you can't stand on that bus stop early in the morning, and the person at your job is threatening to fire you because you are not arriving on time, and you say, well, if I go out in the dark, I have to leave where I am in the dark, and I have to stand on the bus stop, and the bus is always late. See, it's all well figured out. The white supremacists already know this because they orchestrated it, and so they know you can't stay there. So you're going to be looking for another place. And when you go looking for that other place, they say, oh, sure, you can move in here, but now where's the money? You say, well, I don't have that much money. Well, then you can't move in here. It takes money. You know, the world goes around on money, buddy. You know, so keep moving. Okay,
we are up
against, find another place.
We're up against the break, but Estelle, do you have another question before we go to break in about 30 seconds?
Yes, just real quickly was that many of us who have had to pay for these rents, half the time you can't even afford to live. The white supremacists have made it where you have to have good credit, at least out here in California, get an apartment. You have to have good credit. So when you go from apartment to apartment, you start $30, $40 for a credit check, and they require it every time you go. You have to pay for a credit check, and they determine you don't make enough money, you move on to the next. And then the sky-high deposit. Then out here you have to pay water, trash, and sewage, plus electricity, which doesn't include your rent. So they're pretty much saying, you black people, we don't want you to even live.
Wow. Dr. Fuller, quickly?
Yes. So that's something that's going to continue. That's why when people say that they don't want to talk about racism, they're really saying, I don't want to talk about anything that has to do with my being on this planet.
Right.
I want to talk about something about, on another planet. I don't even want to talk about anything that has to do with me being on this planet, because you better believe if you have dark skin and you're on this planet, you're under the system of white supremacy, and all of your problems come from that.
Wow.
So it means that you have to be serious about what white supremacy is and how it works and what to do about it on a daily basis.
Exactly.
And as far as dislocation is concerned, being forced to move from one place to another, stop accumulating stuff that you don't need. Stop accumulating stuff that you don't need, because you're going to have to pay to haul it away.
Exactly. Thank you, Estelle from
Thank
California. You. Appreciate it. You're listening to The Compensatory Concept with Dr. Neely Fuller. That's my word, anyway. Dr. Neely Fuller, exclusively here on TalkTainmentRadio.com. Radio, the way it should be heard. If you want to get in contact or have any questions regarding Talktainment Radio and its programming or website, contact E. Dozier at TalkTainmentRadio.com. And Ed or somebody will get back with you about this. Is that correct, Ed? I got the head shake, so that's yes. Okay, he's guided me along as I'm trying to get back into the swing of things. 1-877-932-9766. Dr. Fuller, there was a movie that came out in 2009 or 2008 called The Inside Job, narrated by Matt Damon. And I studied this, and I'm still studying it and researching it. But what it talked about was what happened in the financial meltdown of the basically of the world economy, coming to the brink of total world financial meltdown. And I looked at the players who are, or the people who were involved in this meltdown, the big businesses, and they named a lot of them. It's common knowledge who these big businesses were and how they got bailed out. And I think they offered us a stimulus package. But the thing that surprised me about this, the last four presidents, Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, and Obama, the thing that got to me, Dr. Fuller, was that basically the same men and women who contributed to the financial meltdown, not only of people, but of even a couple of countries, including New Zealand, but the same characters, the same people were involved in that, and they were hired even on this administration's watch, the same people. And what got to me is, I don't understand if these people were not good and caused the world to come on the brink of it, and it affected everybody with jobs being lost, people being displaced or dislocated, whatever. Why would you want to hire these same people back? And then I tried to apply the codification to it in logic, and it was very difficult for me to do that. Could you speak to that?
Well, you just start with the premise. Now, I don't know the details of what you're talking about, but you start with the premise. If it has anything to do with the quote-unquote affairs of non-white people, we're in one system. It's just one world government already. You've heard the expression, I heard it even back in the 1920s and 30s, that we're headed for one world government.
Yes.
We're always there. We've had one world government as far back as anybody who's breathing now has been breathing. And that is, the name of that government is the system of white supremacy. There has been no other government.
Yes.
And so, therefore, the so-called economics of everything, they cover all sides. And what causes the confusion, that word again,
yes.
Confusion, what causes the confusion, the white supremacists position themselves everywhere.
In those 9 areas of human activity, correct?
And yes, and even when it looks like there is no racism involved, racism is the dominant factor. And they will take all sides. That's another one of their confusion
yes.
tricks.
All sides, yes.
Yes, right. Like in the Middle East crisis, you'll have white supremacists who will say, "Oh, we want it this way. I mean, we got to keep this thing going and all like that." Then you'll have other white supremacists say, "No, let's bring peace there." See, and they go back and forth.
Confusion.
When both of them are working together to keep the confusion going.
Confusion. Okay.
Yes.
All right. 1-877-932-9766. The phone lines are off the hook. James from Baltimore, Maryland. James, what is your question for Dr. Fuller? Hello, James? Okay, there you go. Go ahead. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So I was just going to bring out that there's a lot of interesting movies that's been coming out, and I know Mr. Fuller always talk about paying attention to these movies, and it's this movie in particular. It's called The Purge.
The Purge.
And The Purge. It's called Purge Anarchy, and in that movie, they have like one day where everybody's allowed to just pick up guns and start killing people.
Woo.
Yeah, and then and like in a scene where it's a government organization where they're targeting the projects, a certain project in this area, and they trying to kill the people in that project. And I'm just wondering, what's going on, because that's being put in somebody's mind just watching this movie. I mean, if I'm noticing it, then I'm sure there's some crazy people out here that that might try to engage on some of the stuff that they're saying in the movie.
Wow.
I just wanted to bring that up about that movie.
Dr. Fuller?
Yes, it could be. All movies made in the system of white supremacy have a white supremacist message in there somewhere. Even if there's no black people involved or there's nothing said about white or black or non-white, it's not about slavery or anything like that. But in the system of white supremacy, the movies that are made, directly or indirectly, are connected with buttressing what is called white culture. And white culture is about white supremacy. That's why it's called white culture. Now, that's a term that you don't hear in everyday language, but that's really what they're talking about. Usually, it's cloaked in terms like Western civilization. But what they're talking about is decisions that white people make. And the decisions have to do with white supremacy most of the time. Anytime you hear that term, Western civilization, think in terms of translated white supremacy. Even though the two words, Western civilization, doesn't, neither one of them is about color, but they are about color. Where you don't have Western civilization, you don't have, first of all, a civilization in the minds of the white supremacists. But the truth of the matter is, about this planet and the people on it, there's no such thing as civilization. You don't have civilized people anywhere on this planet. Why? Where's the logic? How can I make a statement like that? Because you can't have civilized people in an uncivilized system. And there's only one system on the planet that governs the people, the affairs of the people on the planet, and that's the system of white supremacy. It's not a civilized system. So you can't have any civilization within that system when the system itself is uncivilized.
Yes, sir. James, you have another question for Dr. Fuller?
No, I guess that was just about it. I would love for him to actually go see this movie, and I mean, I don't know if he actually go out to movies, but when that actually comes out on DVD, that might be a good movie to analyze.
What's the name of the movie?
It's called The Purge.
The Purge. Okay, I'll remember it, and I'll try to see it because I do.
I would love to hear you pick that movie apart. Just to see.
Yes, I mean usually indirect references to race are in most movies. Indirect, going back even to the 1930s. Indirect. You go to the movies in the 1930s and you didn't see black people in most movies. I mean, not even as servants. In most movies, they just didn't show up, even on a street scene. You wouldn't have extras. I mean, just people moving around, walking up and down the street. You didn't see any black people in some of the older movies back in the 1930s and 40s.
Mm-hmm.
But the very fact that the black people weren't there tells you something about racism right there. You don't see any black people on a street, on a city street.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you pan the camera and there are no black people. I mean, they say, well, that's not a racist movie. Yes, it is. Where are the black people that you ordinarily would see? Okay?
Yeah.
So I just thought that I would throw that in there. But
that's good.
There are a lot of lessons in movies about race.
All righty. Well, James, before we go, are there any more questions that you have for the great doctor?
No, I guess that's about it.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, we thank you for calling from, I call it Baltimore. We thank you very much for calling for Baltimore. 1-877-932-9766 is the number that you can call quickly if you want to get in before we wrap this puppy up. Dr. Fuller, was there another concern in the news that you want to speak to while we have these remaining moments?
Well, I heard something recently about so-called domestic violence. I mean, they can take that domestic out of, you know, that should be dropped. Just say violence. People are violent. You know, you're either violent or you're not. You're either being violated. You're either being violated or you're not. So, if you're talking about black male and female interaction, which is what a recent subject was about, I heard in the last 48 hours, something about that. Now, what does the code say about that? Because, like I said, the reason I wrote my books is not about just talking about the problems endlessly. It's about making suggestions about what each individual can do. So, I have a saying, a codified saying that I've been using for years. First time, last time. Now, what does that mean? That means the first time that black males, because it's usually the black male that does it, sometimes it's a black female, particularly I'm addressing the black male. The first time he hits that black female, I'm giving this as an illustration.
Yes, sir.
This is a codified response. That so-called relationship is over. And it's over ad infinitum, meaning into infinity.
Wow.
Meaning there is no such thing as you getting that back together again.
Wow.
That should be an absolute worldwide. When you get so angry about whatever it is, other than self-defense, that you hit her willfully, deliberately, because something that you're dissatisfied about. I'm talking to the non-white male now. That you strike her, you do bodily harm to her, your mate, your care mate, the person that you call your significant other. That is an announcement. This relationship is dead.
Wow.
And she should take that position immediately. Oh, you hit me? So we both know what that means. That even though I might be under the same roof with you indefinitely because I have no other places to go and all like that, this relationship is dead. I'm already in the market for looking for somebody else, and you should be too, because you just announced that this relationship is over. It's never going to be. I mean, you just announced that. That should be ironclad code for every non-white person on this planet. I mean, that, saying you lost your temper temporarily and all like that, that doesn't fly.
Wow.
It's not supposed to happen. This is a person that you say is your care mate.
Yes,
this
sir.
is a person that you chose to be with. So it shouldn't be any type of violence. You might can argue. Oh, you can argue. You can blow up verbally, But when the licks start being passed, I mean, when you ball up your fist, for one thing, if you're a black male, you're not balling up your fist against a white supremacist. So what are you going to hit her for? You're not in charge of anybody, including yourself, sir.
Wow. I guess we're going to have to leave it there, Dr. Fuller. Thank you so much, man. TalkToMeRadio.com, the world's greatest radio. Radio the way it should be heard. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Compensatory Concept with Mr. Neely Fuller, heard exclusively on TalkTainmentRadio.com, the world's greatest radio.
The most important question in all racial matters is why. One should always ask it.
Radio, the way it should be heard.
You got the power. The world's greatest radio. TalkTainmentRadio.com.